a smash or pass with our guests, so we aren't all sitting in silence awkwardly. So if you have a strong opinion or a controversial opinion on these, please elaborate and feel free to chime into the chat too. So smash or pass dual POV novels.
As an author, pass, but as a reader, smash.
Smash because I'm currently writing one.
Jonny, yeah, you took my exact answer. That's how I feel. Writing it's like, but if it's done well in a book, I love it.
Yeah, I felt a little weird asking that, having a dual POV novel on today's reading list, but I was like, I think we'll answer nicely. I'm also a smash. Futura on book covers. Smash or pass?
What? What is on book covers?
The font Futura. I realize this might be like too nerdy of a thing, but it's like
a very niche question.
Is it serif or sans serif?
Sans serif. And like pointy, like really pointy.
Oh, I need to hold on.
I know. I love this. Is this like a Helvetica? It's sort of like how people have controversial opinions about Helvetica. Okay. I'm too ignorant to know what that typeface looks like.
I'll drop media page into the chat.
I think generally pass.
I'm trying to look it up, but for me, my criteria is it dyslexia friendly? Is it acceptable? And if not, then pass. But I'm trying to figure this out.
It's giving like this.
Ooh,
not quite that. That's a really fancy Futura. Like, oh my god.
Maybe like closer to that. It's giving like Pokemon symbols.
Would you smash Pokemon symbols on the cover of a book?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
I don't know anything about Pokemon either. Just like Futura. Yeah.
Okay. Smash or pass floral book covers?
I'm gonna say smash just because I have so many of them on my shelves right now.
Yeah, it's so trendy.
I feel like it's become a really sorry.
I know. I like a good floral.
I feel like it's become a thing very specifically in like girly pop YA horror, which is definitely a vibe, and I'm a big fan of that.
Yeah, that's kind of a dichotomy of like floral and then like death and destruction.
Yeah, like I'm picturing like The Honeys has like a really pretty floral cover by Ryan LaSala, or like Brittany S. Lewis's books are like YA horror, very pretty.
Also, I'm just remembering that 2 of my book covers have like a font out there.
Yeah, I didn't want to call you out, but they do.
Would you smash a cactus on a book cover, specifically for Jonny?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Every time.
Yes.
I have a giant succulent plant on my next book cover, so I'm pro cactuses on the cover. Anything.
That would be so pretty. Okay. Smash or pass special editions of books that you already own?
So you can't really see right now. Let me see if I can angle it. But currently my bookshelves are, let me see. Can we angle this? No, we can't angle it properly. But just know that my bookshelves are so full that I'm starting to stack books on top of the bookshelves, and I'm quite short, so I can't really reach up there. So in my heart, like aesthetically, I like looking at them on screens, but for me, it has to be a pass because I will not be able to move around my apartment.
Admire bar like across the bar, but not take home with you.
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, I ended up with 2 copies of Oathbound by Tracy Dion because we went to her book tour, and I pre-bought the Barnes and Noble edition early, and now I just have like these 2 giant books sitting in my home, and they're so large.
To read the early versions because she reads for the swords.
I do read for the swords. I have my Legendborn shelf down here. I
could see them before there were more of us left.
Yeah. I love
And
that.
I definitely have like 4 versions of the Sun Bearer trials, I'm pretty sure, at home.
Hmm.
The paperback of Cemetery Boys is coming out, and I'm like, do I need this? Do I need
Yeah, my apartment's too tiny. I'm definitely not like yucking anyone's yum if they love special covers, but I'm like, I don't have any space in this tiny apartment.
Yeah. Okay. Now we're gonna get onto some like tropey ones. Smash or pass, enemies / rivals to lovers.
Smash, yeah.
Yeah, I'm into it. I like the trope.
I mean, yes. I mean, I have a other favorite trope, but I would say like light smash.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
You're like
we
in the
might
top 5,
get to
like the top 5.
Yes, top 5.
Top
but not-
1, yeah. I
Okay,
agree.
let's see if maybe this is something you like better. Friends to lovers.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
My ride or die.
That was instant.
Yes.
Yeah, that did seem like a vibe for this group of people. Having read your books. Smash or pass, the forced proximity trope.
Love. Yeah. Smash.
Yes.
Yeah, I would be a huge hypocrite if I started criticizing that trope. So I do very much love it.
Like, especially when it's queer. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
I mean, everything is better when it's queer.
There's that. Happy Pride Month.
Happy Pride.
Okay, bonus chapters in another character's point of view.
I'm with it. Yeah. Smash.
Yeah. Smash.
For sure. Yeah. If I feel like it's worked into the book in like a necessary way, I might complain about how long it is. But if it's a bonus chapter at the end, like a treat, then I'm like, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, a little treat at the end.
Yeah.
Okay, and then we already talked about them a little, but sans serif fonts versus serif fonts. And serifs are the ones with like the little ticks on them, the little fancy guys.
I'm pro serif, I think, mostly. Yeah.
Unless it's like on a PowerPoint, then like I want a cute sans serif.
That's specific.
Yeah. I was gonna say
I think you're right. I think they're right.
I was just gonna say sans serif because of dyslexia and disability and stuff. But aesthetically, like if I'm just sitting and writing, I might use a little serif font.
Ooh.
I was just pulling everyone's websites to drop in the chat and be like, these are their books. And Johnny's is like entirely cactuses.
Entirely
So going back to
and sans serif and sans
Yeah.
serif font.
well, there we go. It's in the chat for folks who want to take a look.
Cool. So it's almost 2:10. So let's go ahead and get started. I'm Allison Araya DeBusk. I'm the social media editor at Kneebase. I use she, her pronouns, and today we're discussing grief in young adult fiction. As you can see, we have an incredible set of authors here today. I am fangirling so much. I feel like I'm doing a really good job of actually speaking to them. First, we have Jonny Garza Villa, a product of the great state of Texas, a Sagittarius sun, and Capricorn everything else, and an author of award-winning coming-of-age stories and romances inspired by their own Tejane and Chicane and queer identities, including International Latino Book Award winner Ander Santi Were Here, 2025 Stonewall Book Award winner Canto Contigo, and their new adult debut Futbolista. And they live in San Antonio, Texas. Jonny, will you tell us a little about Canto Contigo?
Yeah, absolutely. So Canto Contigo, it's like I'm holding up my computer. It looks like this. Is oh my gosh, I describe it as like, wow. Hold on.
It's just as soon as you have to start talking.
Literally, it's just gonna be like this for a minute. Anyways, there it goes. I describe Canto Contigo as like a half grief story, half rivals to lovers romance, all about the epic highs and lows of high school mariachi. And it follows a main character named Robbie, who is the Leoist son to ever Leo son and self-described God's gift to mariachi, who right before his senior year moves from his small border town in Texas up to San Antonio. And with that is leaving his like top nationally ranked mariachi group at his high school for a high school that has a group that has always been like the far second to his group. But the one redeeming quality about this that he can sort of like find for himself is that of course they're going to be begging him to be their new lead vocalist, which does not happen. He runs into, very much literally, their current lead vocalist, who by no means is eager to give up that spot, and is also a boy that he made out with like about 8 months previous at the last National Mariachi competition. And so it sparks a rivalry between the two as they compete for lead vocalist, while also made co-leads and forced to sort of work together while very reluctant to work together. And yeah, it's very much a story about Rafi figuring out what's more important to him, being in community or making someone proud of you, or holding on to grief and perfectionism and all of these things that sort of inhibit our ability to grow whenever we've lost someone important to us for the very first time.
And it's incredible. All of these books are incredible. I'm going to say that every time. Our second author is Lillie Lainoff, a fencer, coach, and the founder of Disabled Kidlit Writers. Her short stories are featured in the Los Angeles Review and the upcoming YA anthology, These Bodies Ain't Broken, and her nonfiction has been published in the Washington Post. She received her BA from Yale University and her MA in Creative Writing Prose Fiction from the University of East Anglia. One for All, her debut novel, was named a Best Book of 2022 by NPR. And Lillie, will you tell us a little bit about One for All?
Yes, One for All is right here. And so One for All is a gender reimagining of the Three Musketeers with a main character with postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, POTS for short. In it, a girl named Tanya, after the death of her father, is sent off to what she believes is a preparatory school for brides in Paris. Because everybody in her town thinks that her disability makes her weak and makes her not potential wife material. And as she's sent off to Paris, she joins this school, which she actually realizes is a secret training ring for a new kind of musketeer, an all-woman group of musketeers. And throughout the course of the novel, she learns to accept herself for who she is. And there's a lot of found family, sisterhood, and lots of fencing, which I love.
And it is so fun, so twisty, so wonderful. And third, we have Robbie Couch, a Los Angeles-based author who is originally from Michigan. If I See You Again Tomorrow, his New York Times bestselling third novel, has received starred reviews from Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and the Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books, and it made me cry literally hysterically. Robbie's debut, The Sky Blues, was a Barnes & Noble Young Adult Book of the Year finalist and Junior Library Guild selection. So, Robbie, will you tell us a little about Another First Chance?
Yes, thank you for that intro. That was so nice. Yeah, Another First Chance follows River, who's a gay high schooler who lost his best friend in a really tragic car accident about a year prior to the book beginning. And he's still going through it. He's grieving. He's mourning the loss of his best friend. And he sort of gets blackmailed into entering what's called the affinity trials, which are essentially like a social science experiment happening on the campus of this high school over summer break to help with kids who are quote unquote struggling socially. But once he's at the affinity trials, he starts to realize that there's a lot of secrets behind the scenes at the trials in terms of what they're actually researching and what's happening behind the scenes. And at the same time, he's discovering that maybe his feelings toward his best friend Dylan were maybe more than just friends. So yeah, definitely hits on grief and a lot of the stuff we'll probably be talking about today.
Awesome. Thank y'all so much. I have some questions for them, but please put any others in the chat and we'll try to get to those too. So first, I'm a huge Casey McQuiston fan. And in describing their latest book, they said they had a I think I've got to kill your mom moment about one of their main characters. And that made me wonder, when you guys set out to write your stories, did you know that grief and loss was going to be so central, or did you have a similar moment?
I think that whenever I decided to write a book on like mariachi and that sort of topic in particular, um, I don't know if I was necessarily cognizant of it immediately, but mariachi itself is something that like I share this with Rafi, and that like I also had a grandfather who was a mariachi and also passed away from complications because of Parkinson's syndrome. And so I don't think I could have written this topic or someone engaging with this music without incorporating that and like having that sort of like honoring of my own sort of personal life and my grandfather while writing this book. And so yeah, I think that it was very much like a natural, obviously it's going to be there sort of thing. It for sure wasn't like a I don't think it really was like a choice. It sort of just like presented itself there naturally, but also I guess really chaotically in Rafi's sense. But yeah, I think like I could not have written this book about music in this way without also incorporating and sharing, I think, that sort of like grief process with this character as I wrote it, which it really turned out to be.
That's really beautiful. I didn't know that. Lillie and Robbie, what do y'all think?
I think for me, there were two aspects of it. One that was more personal and one that was more craft related and actual book related. So around the time that I started writing One for All, maybe before, I lost my uncle and my grams very unexpectedly within the same year of each other. So it was something that grief was already something that I was thinking a lot about, and it was coming onto the page more than I expected. But I think that also for me, there is, in One for All, there's kind of the concrete sense of grief in the terms of she's grieving her father, but there's also the abstract sense of grief, which is she's grieving her past body, her non-chronically ill body. And I think that it was the best way for me to be able to explore these two forms of grief was to put them both on the same page together. And then they started kind of intertwining in a way that I hadn't expected.
Okay, and Robbie, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, grief was pretty much from the beginning. Grief was a major theme of the book. I felt kind of, yeah, from page one. Originally, I kind of felt inspired to, like the concept of grieving your closeted high school self was something that was kind of like bouncing around in my brain for a while, like missing out on those years because you were closeted and you weren't able to truly be yourself. So similarly to Lillie, obviously there's lots of different forms of grief, and something that kind of stood out to me was that particular form of it. And then the way that it translated into the book wasn't necessarily apples to apples, but grief was still always sort of the underlying foundation of the book from the very beginning. And then the very first page of the book, you read that his best friend died a year ago. So it's pretty, it's not all sad, I promise. Hopefully there's a little levity. But yeah, grief was a big part of it.
Actually, that leads really well into one of the questions I was going to ask, which is that all of you are really expertly writing about romance and grief at the same time, and also about friendship and joy and a lot of other things. But in particular, with the romance and grief of it all, did you ever have any moments when you were worried that your characters were too giddy and in love or too in their grief? And what's it like to balance those highs and lows as an author?
I feel like for me, what I was really trying to be thoughtful of is like Rafi's own sort of character arc as he grieves and sort of like closes himself off to friends and community and the people who create music with him and his mariachi group, and how eventually like he sort of like allows himself to trust people emotionally, and what that kind of looks like. And so I think it was really important for me then to show moments of him like grieving in a way that is just real hard on page, To even like find those good days and then revert back to, oh man, this is actually a bad day now. 3 days later, even though like I'm happier than I have been in a long time. And also like those moments of like, yeah, I'm super down bad for this person, but also being able to show it like really hard on page while showing like, but no, like I can't, oh my god, no. And so yeah, I really loved like really just digging into how deeply he is feeling both of those sort of things, and how that both like allows him to reach for places whenever, or like for me to even reach for places whenever I need him to maybe fall back a little bit emotionally or really set himself up for some sort of success. And it allows me to like I guess like a path in which I can create that growth and character arc for him. And also I feel like just genuinely I do not write main characters who aren't incredibly down bad for these love interests. So I don't know if I could write a calmly infatuated like main character.
Well, that would be boring.
Yeah, for sure.
Hey, Lily, what did you think about that?
I think for me, in terms of like the concept of like, are they too happy? You know, are things switching around? I think that for Tanya, at least, she has a lot of really complicated feelings about her father's death because he was murdered, and there's also this sense of betrayal, right? Because she thinks that he's the one that's forced her off to this bridal preparatory academy, and this idea of, you know, her thinking that perhaps he really did think that she was weak all along and that she's not able to take care of herself. And there are other spoilers that I can't get into in terms of, you know, feeling betrayed. So it's kind of this push and pull throughout the novel of her grieving him, but also, you know, grieving the idea of him that she once thought was the actual him. But I think that too, again, the romance is also complicated by the fact that, you know, her initial romance is with one of her musketeer targets. So it's not exactly like she can get away from this guy in that sense. But yeah, no, I think that somebody in the chat popped up, this idea of like everybody grieves differently. And I think that it's especially important for teenagers and when we're talking about YA to see that there are all these different forms of grieving and that it's okay to not have what one might consider like a stereotypical grieving process.
I feel like, Robbie, that's especially true in your book.
Yeah, no, Lily basically, that was my answer. I feel like because River, the main character in Another First Chance, one of the things from the very beginning is that you learn about him is that many adults and high schoolers at his school kind of feel like he's grieving in weird ways, quote unquote, or, you know, he's not sad enough, or he's too, you know, he's thinking about this too trivially or whatever. And something that I kind of wanted to underscore throughout the book is that idea, right? Like you can't really judge anyone for grieving in their own personal way. And I think because that was sort of the idea from the beginning, or something that I wanted to keep in mind, I like, because I'm a big like plotter, I have a very, very like thorough outline before I start any book, and I really wanted to keep track of like the emotional pacing of the book and making sure that I didn't have these huge, you know, like very emotionally draining chapters together, and that I kind of wanted to be very mindful of how the reader would experience the flow of the story. And so I think it's not only okay to kind of have these like happy moments intertwined with really sad and tragic and grieving moments, because that's kind of life, right? Like we kind of all experience all these emotions kind of simultaneously sometimes. And so that was something that I wanted to make sure felt grounded and real with River's experience.
Yeah, and all of you, it's so wonderful in these books. They are like truly like the most like giggling, kicking your feet stories, and then being like, oh my God, I am devastated. So as you mentioned, these are all about teenagers. So I was wondering, how do you think teenagers experience grief differently from adults? And then how did that impact how you were going about writing them?
I could, Sorry, I didn't want to cut you off.
Oh,
Okay.
you can, yeah.
I think something that I came back to from my own, I mean, I think it's important to know, again, just like everyone grieves differently. So just because you're a teenager doesn't necessarily mean, teenagers are not a monolith in the way that they grieve. But for me, something that I thought about was the fact that a lot of my, like when you experience grief and a very big loss for the first time as a kid or as a teenager, it just kind of hits differently. It hits differently no matter what age you are. And so I kind of kept that in mind just because this was the first big kind of tragic loss that River had experienced in his life. And so I think that with that experience comes a different emotional journey compared to someone who's kind of been through it before. And so I think that experience kind of probably rings true for a lot of teenagers. And so that was something I tried to keep in mind. Yeah.
Jonny, did you have something to add?
I think like to go off Robbie, like I really wanted to be, putting forth the idea that like nothing has to be the same about anyone's experience as it comes to grief. It doesn't have to be like everyone experiences grief the same. And I think too, like just because someone is 17 versus like 27, there also could be a lot of similarities in the way in which we experience grief, especially if it's like your first time having this like big moment of losing someone. And we have that experience before. I think there's probably some similarities in just how big that feels to your life, no matter where you are. And so I think I really wanted to focus on the ways in which like Rafi in particular would feel and represent grief on page, like someone who is very much like wanting to be the center of attention all the time, then like closes himself up to a lot of people, and like how that just sort of like differentiates from his and what could be like the best part of his personality. He tends to just like take away and keep to himself, and how he already was sort of a perfectionist in life before losing his grandfather, how that just sort of becomes exaggerated with this newfound purpose to be perfect all the time. I really wanted to just like think of the ways in which like this person in particular might feel grief and might experience it outwardly towards other people. And I think that really helped me at least fully form this character into someone who hopefully feels more real. Because, especially like as someone who's more introverted for sure than Rafi, like I think I would experience grief a lot differently, and the way in which I would react to grief is probably a lot different than how he would. And so, yeah, like I really wanted to just kind of connect with him as a character, and then hopefully allow that to create some universality for teen readers, and teen readers experiencing loss, and even for like the young at heart experiencing loss. Yeah.
And Lillie, do you want to add anything?
I was trying to find an eloquent way to build upon what they said, because what they said is exactly what I wanted to say. And the idea of like, if you are very lucky as a teenager, like that, for you to have your first real experience of grief or loss as a teenager, it does hit different. It's this idea of, you're experiencing all these emotions at one time, but you're also trying to figure out how to use what words you want to use in order to convey your emotions. And I think about this a lot because I coach fencing, and this is more related to like the very younger kids, but like the emotions are so big, and they don't necessarily, like the really littles don't necessarily have the words yet in order to express those emotions. And I think teenagers, they are right. They have the words, they have the emotions, but this is like their first time of actually being able to, kind of use them together. And I think that's that is all I wanted to say, build upon.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all. And then Jonny, you mentioned this a little bit, but in these stories, I felt like grief has a lot to do with legacy and living up to the expectations of the person that you've lost. How do you think your characters grapple with that, either by rising to the occasion or accepting that they might not meet those expectations, or something else?
Yeah, I think again, like it really just forms like who Rafi is on I guess the page, whatever page starts like real world time, 20 something or whatever, as someone who like is incredibly so a perfectionist. And I think too, though, someone who like is in mariachi, who has experienced the loss of someone who taught him music and gave him mariachi, and therefore like knows how to perform and knows how to be the best at it, but fully I think has lost his love for it whenever you first like meet him post grandfather loss. And so like I really wanted to write a character who has, I think, too, not figured out yet that he does not necessarily love mariachi in the way he did years ago before his grandfather started showing the symptoms of Parkinson's, and like really having to evaluate the fact that he is going to lose someone at some point. And like, what does it look like to then like relearn to love something when that person is no longer there? You know, one of those like essential questions that he asks himself is like, who am I supposed to be for the next 17 years of my life, when for the first 17 I had like you, and this was like my stability, and who like a lot of my own personality and likes and loves like originates from. And so I really wanted to create a process of grief that showed, especially I think from a young point of view, that like we can very much like honor and remember and keep in our hearts and souls those people who have made us who we are, especially all the best parts of who we are, but also the importance of doing that while also for yourself creating like what it is to be a product of that is still very much formed by these people, but is also especially so something that is you, and something that is so very much you that like they still shine whenever you shine. And that's really what I wanted to present with Rafi, and eventually whenever he fully gets there and learns to love this music again, and I think especially so loves performing it with other people, what that looks like for him, and how he's still going to grieve and mess up, but at the same time he's allowing himself to, you know, Grinchify his heart 3 times its size by the end of the book, and what that's going to slowly do for him. I didn't really necessarily want to create a person, for sure, because it's not real, but like create someone who is fixed, quote unquote, by the end of the book, because that's just not how reality works. But someone who is now seeing the better parts of himself show up because of other people, and how he can slowly start getting to where he is the person that he can be in love with.
Robbie, how do you think that River deals with this kind of feeling?
My stupid Wi-Fi went out for a second right when you were asking the question. So I'm sorry.
Okay.
Repeat it. That was a great answer, Johnny. Whatever the question was about.
I said that I felt like grief has a lot to do with like legacy, and living up to the expectations or legacy of the person that was lost. So how do you think River grapples with that?
That is such a good question. Yeah, I think he's definitely grappling with it. I think he's dealing with the loss himself just internally, and his own arc in the book is mostly focused on how his relationship to missing Dylan is, and his feelings towards him. But at the same time, by the end of it, no spoilers, I think he has he's found peace in remembering Dylan in a way that he feels would kind of honor Dylan, and also was true to the person that Dylan always was. But I think especially with Dylan kind of being this like all-star charismatic character that everyone loved, and he was so kind, and he was, you know, quote unquote going places, right? He was that sort of guy in high school. And so the idea of legacy, I think especially, it rings true with that character, because it's like, oh, what, like, if he's no longer on this planet, how is he going to impact the world? And I think that's something that by the end of it, River's kind of, kind of starting that new chapter of like, how can I move on and bring Dylan with me and honor his legacy? So that's a really good question. I've actually never answered it before in a panel.
Okay, and Lillie, what do you think?
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that for Tanya, I think she actually talks a lot about legacy, like word for word in the actual book itself. Because I think that she thinks about it a lot in terms of the fact that she's an only child and she is an only daughter at a time where women could not own property. And she was expected to get married. And I think that she has to think a lot about what kind of legacy her father was leaving in terms of her being able to continue on that legacy and needing to continue it on. While her father was alive, he was the one person that she fenced with. He was the one that was encouraging her. And so she had this sense of, sorry, had a spoonie moment. Give me one sec to get my thoughts back. So I think that for Tanya, her idea of legacy is so closely entwined with like her father's ability to leave his legacy on in terms of her being able to fence. And then when he is sending her off to Paris, and she thinks that she's not going to be able to continue on his legacy in the way that he would have wanted her to. So I think that over the course of the novel, it's her trying to realize that she can actually continue on his legacy in a way that feels authentic to her. And that's what he would have wanted in the first place.
Okay, and then Bethany has put in a question. So I'm going to go ahead and get to that. After writing one book dealing with grief, would you consider writing another in the future? Or are they too sad and you have to tap out?
I can take it. I feel like it's weird. I was thinking about this panel and just thinking about the themes of it and everything, and I feel like grief has been, if not the main theme, at least a theme in all of my books. Not necessarily grieving the loss of life, but grieving something in an impactful way. And so yeah, I think I will include in my next book that's coming out, grief is a big part of it. So I kind of feel like, for me especially, I think living in this like post-COVID world where like my first book came out in 21. So I was thinking about the other day where it's like all of my writing has been either in the throes of COVID or in kind of the post-COVID era. And I think the idea of grief kind of seeped its way into my creative conscious in ways that I probably wasn't aware of before. So yeah, I think it shows up in a lot of my writing and probably will continue to.
Jonny, you were nodding. Do you have a feeling about that too?
I think like short answer is like, yeah, I would for sure write a book where like grief is the center of the story again. But I also do think that like I couldn't write a story about grief that wasn't very like internalized of my own sort of experience or where I am like mental health wise and all of these things. And so as someone who like wrote I guess a very like self-insert debut book, that post that has taught me like to be really intentional about how much I give an audience and readership of myself at any given time. And so if I do, like, it would be at a point where like I'm fine sort of sharing those like deeper thoughts and emotions and mentalities like with readership, or if when I'm not, then I'm not going to. But yeah, like I would be definitely interested in writing more like grief-centered stories. I don't know when that'll happen, but yeah, I for sure see it happening.
And Lillie, what about you?
Yeah, Jonny, I definitely feel the same way about trying to figure out like how much of yourself you're giving to people, and also this sense of once it's out there, like you can't really take it back, and how do you kind of take steps back? As somebody who like was very candid about their chronic illness and about the POTS representation, I'm very happy. Just to be clear, I'm very happy that I was vocal about having POTS, because I wouldn't want people to think that like one of the first books is out there, it's not written by somebody with POTS. But yeah, no, it is a lot. I think that I definitely would write a book, maybe not necessarily about grief, but has grief in it. I don't really consider One for All a book about grief, but I know that some readers do, which I think is interesting, right? Because it's you know, what a reader takes from it. I think that for me, especially in YA, because I became chronically ill when I was a teenager, I'm always, when I'm writing YA, I always find myself writing, as I mentioned earlier, this abstract sense of grief, of grieving your previous body. And I think that is, from all my chronically ill friends and all the readers that I've spoken to, that is one of the most universal experiences of chronic illness, is this sense of grieving your past life while also trying to figure out how to move on and work with your new body. So I don't think that that's something that's ever going to leave my work. But whether or not I'm writing about grieving a person, maybe, who knows?
Okay, and then Meg has a craft question for y'all and was wondering, how do you take that internalized grief journey to externalize it through action? Meg says that their editor always says that they focus so much on internal and forget the actual external plot, LOL. So how do y'all navigate that?
I can take that one. I guess for me, I made the grieving process directly entwined with the plot. So the fact that, you know, her father was the one that sent her to Paris, so she has to be thinking about him and grief, while at the same time she's actively doing musketeer things. But also in One for All, her father's presence, you don't know if he's actually there or not, but he actually becomes a voice throughout the book, speaking to her. And she kind of has conversations back and forth with him at points. So I think that was a way to externalize it for me, and for readers to have this actual dialogue to move the plot forward. So I guess I would say, in terms of craft, there are ways to play around with it, whether it's through dialogue, whether it's through, you know, incorporating it into the conflict. So it's not completely internalized, just in terms of, you know, stream of consciousness, train of thought.
Yeah, Lily, I feel like in One for All, there's a point where like the emotional and the fencing overlap so well that's like 3/4 of the way through the book, that is like a perfect representation of that. And I don't want to say exactly what it is, because it feels like people should get to experience it if they haven't read One for All. But like, come back to me if you read One for All and tell me if you also think that moment was awesome, because you'll know it when you see it. It's incredible.
Thank you.
I think for me, like, I really wanted to make grief like its own solid foundation of Rafi's story, but I also wanted to use it as a way to like humanize him and give at least myself somewhere to work on his own like redemption arc as like a rivals to lovers story, and like hopefully like give readers some sort of context of like why he is like he is. And you know, by the end, like, even if people still think he's a butthole by the end, at least they think maybe he's like a very human butthole. But I also too like I got like the suggestion from my editor that like we can like tell that Rafi is grieving on page, but like how is that really showing up on page? And for me, that then turned into incorporating magical realism into the story, with like this mariachi calavera that talks to Rafi, and sort of like has a voice like his, like a younger version of his abuelo. And so I think maybe like even just considering like cultural or ancestral ways of grief and of storytelling, and also just like how does your character specifically grieve in their life and what might that look like physically, could really be a help of just like not necessarily keeping the grief inside, but allowing it to showcase how they communicate with their world.
I'm very in favor of bringing back butthole as like a mainstream insult to people. Love that. Yeah, my answer kind of is similar, to Lily and Johnny's, where when I was plotting the book, I realized that probably the first third to a half, I felt like it was much easier to kind of seamlessly, or as best as I could, have his River's emotional arc as it related to grief kind of in part of the story in that way. But once he got into the affinity trials, I really struggled with how can his grief show up on the page in ways that felt real and authentic, at the same time that there was like this pretty intense mystery around like what the trials were. And there was lots of like action between different secondary characters in like the second half of the book. And so it was kind of a balancing act of like figuring out how, you know, the reader can still be reminded that River is going on this journey, and how does that relate to all of the craziness that happens in the trials themselves. And so yeah, I had to rewrite quite a few paragraphs / chapters in that section of the book, but hopefully by the end of it, it worked out okay.
I actually hadn't thought about that until we're all sitting here talking, is that all three of you do incorporate some amount of like, of less something realistic in your books about how they're dealing with grief. And that is really interesting. I had not thought about the fact that you all three do that. And they all have a way that they like can talk a little bit to like the person that they're grieving. And it's all done really well. Okay. We also, someone in the chat is asking, what is one thing you learned about yourself in writing this book?
That writing dual POV is really hard. It was very hard. I don't know how writers do it. That honestly, from a craft standpoint, that was something I learned. Which is not to say I'm not going to keep doing it, but it was tricky. I really learned that, not to be like a completely broken record, but just the ways in which I think grief kind of surfaces and shows up in all of our lives in so many different forms, and the way that it affects the way we think and see the world. I think writing this book really challenged me to see that, not only in myself, but just people in the world. And I feel like that's made me a bit more empathetic or compassionate to people who might have hidden struggles that I know about or don't know about. And so, yeah, I think just like the complexity of grief and all the different ways that it manifests in all of us is something that I've been much more, I think, just conscious of in the world.
From like, I think just a pure like craft point of view, I have learned that I hate outlining because of this book. It was like the first one that I fully outlined and like was intentional about like tropes with like romance and all that. Usually I just write a main character who's like, I want to kiss this person, and that's like page 6. And I got to like have that, but then they got to hate each other for like the next 200 pages. And so yeah, like I fully outlined this book, and when I finished it, I realized that like I hated it for some reason that I was not necessarily fully aware of yet, and it took a long time to become aware of all the ways in which I was just like so over this book for some reason. But I do think a lot of it is because I tend to flourish more whenever I can sort of let my main character take the wheel, and whenever I outlined, it just felt like I really needed to stick to this exact roadmap that I made. And they can't leave it for any reason, hands and feet in the ride at all times. And so I think that like it really felt like it inhibited my creativity for a little bit. And so I definitely left it respecting the art of outlining, and for sure like becoming someone who can embrace like beats and all those sort of things, but has like found my own way of incorporating that with someone who sort of just likes to open Microsoft Word and vibe. So yeah, I think as much as like it taught me to really hate like getting into outlining, it really did show me how it can be helpful, and also how to use it in the best way possible for my own sort of storytelling.
Lily, can I ask? So Robbie is a plotter and Johnny's a pantser. Which one are you?
So I always used to be a pantser. The idea of outlining makes me physically nauseous. I think that for me at least, and like Johnny, I really admire like, the art of plotting. You know, good for you guys. Like, Good. I wish I could do that more. It would make my life a little bit easier, I think, in terms of, for example, One for All. There's so many subplots for One for All. Like there's a conspiracy to kill the king. And there's this idea of, like, how do we, if we don't appreciate monarchies, how do we also be musketeers? What does legacy mean? What does honor mean? And there were so many subplots that because I pantsed that book, it made revising it an actual nightmare. I had so many index cards full of notes on what I needed to fix. It was bad. I mean, it ended up all turning out okay, but it made it very difficult. So I think that now I'm somewhere in between. I think they call it like a flashlight or a spotlight reviser. It's where you kind of know where you're going. Like you have little tiny maybe beats throughout, but it's not really outlined. You just have like a kind of idea of where you're going, vaguely. But in terms of what I learned about myself, I feel like this is, I say this all the time and I feel like it's getting a bit cheesy, but I really did learn how to love myself writing this book. I think that it's really hard to write a novel about a girl learning to accept her chronic illness in her body and not kind of, start to feel that way yourself. I think that for me also, I mean, I wrote One for All partially because I grew up not having any characters with books like me, with main characters like me in them. And I think that by doing so, I learned that I could write these books, but also like these books are also good. They're good craft-wise. It's not just the representation. And I think that was nice for me to remind myself of while I was writing.
Okay. I think we have gotten to all of our audience questions. So my last question for y'all is, what do you think your main character would have to remember someone by?
Can you say it again? What do you think that?
What would your main character have to remember someone by? Like what would be like a little trinket they keep to remember someone?
I mean, Tanya has her swords
Mm-hmm.
from her dad. I think that I think that Tanya's are probably related to weaponry.
That's a good question. I'm trying to remember little tidbits from the book. I think without too much spoiler, if anyone plans on reading another first chance, but Dylan left behind some things or a thing that River learns about and appreciates by the end of it. So, but I don't know. That's a good question. I don't know if there's something specific beyond that. But yeah.
Jonny is here and can talk. I am having trouble getting them pinned back onto the screen. I apologize for that.
Okay, well, I can just talk then. Yeah, also, not to get into spoilers, but there's like a mariachi calavera that Rafi got from his abuelo's house that has like a real like thing in which like he uses to remember him. But he also has like a guitar that belonged to him. And so I think like for sure those two things, yeah, like I think on page like we see like the calavera and also like a guitar that he like keeps like hung by his bed. That was like one of the first guitars that his grandfather had. Yeah, I think those are the
He gets a tattoo too, right?
Oh yeah, he has a tattoo. You're so right. He has a tattoo with like a cempasúchil or like marigold flower, and like the date of his grandfather's birth. Probably, I don't remember at this point.
I think so. I think that's what it is.
It's always funny talking about books that like lived in our brains sometimes like 5 years ago or however many years ago, and then you're like, wait, what was that character's name?
Last year it was so fresh, and now it's like I wrote that book.
What was the title again?
Okay, well, we don't have anything else in our chat, and we're about to hit 3 o'clock. So thank y'all so much for coming today and talking to us about your incredible books. Nicole dropped all of their links in there. You can find all of them on like Goodreads. Their books are also, if you're on Storygraph now, they're also on there. Yeah, and we're Knee Brace Press. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us today.
Yeah, thank you guys. Thank you, Allison, for moderating. This was her first ever panel, and she absolutely slayed. So thank you for moderating, and thank you to everyone for coming out. The chat was so lively. Sometimes I feel like I'm just here talking into the ether. So I was very happy today. But yeah, check out all of their books, and y'all are more than invited to all of our future panels. So
sweet. Thanks for having me, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.
Thanks, guys.
I will stop the recording.